He had never seen his wife silenced before. Not by a threat, not by a plea, and certainly not by the soft-spoken waitress, with a smudge of flour on her cheek. But there it was. The entire, glittering expanse of Aria, one of the city's most expensive restaurants, was frozen in a collective gasp. Isabella, his Isabella, in her regal dark purple dress that had cost more than the car the girl probably drove, stood with her mouth slightly agape, her wrist caught in the waitress's firm, steady grip. Dante Moretti watched the tableau from his seat, the ice in his glass of whiskey forgotten. He should have been incandescent with rage. An employee, a nobody, had dared to lay a hand on his wife. He should have been signaling for Marco to handle it, to drag the girl into an alley and remind her of the natural order of things. Instead, a slow, unfamiliar current of something that felt dangerously like admiration was coiling in his gut. The girl wasn't shaking. Her voice, when she had spoken, had been low and clear, cutting through Isabella's shrill tirade with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He replayed the moment, the words that had hung in the dead-silent air. "That is enough, just that. Not a question. A declaration." He looked at the girl, truly looked at her for the first time all night. She wasn't the kind of woman who usually caught his eye. She was soft and round, with a gentle, heart-shaped face and dark, serious eyes. She was built for comfort, not for combat. Yet here she was, in the center of his world, holding its most volatile element in check with nothing more than a steady hand and an unwavering gaze. And Dante Moretti, a man who commanded legions and trafficked in fear, felt a profound and terrifying shift in the bedrock of his own existence. The evening had begun like any other for Rowan. The familiar weight of her apron, the scent of starched linen and roasting garlic, the low hum of conversation, that was the restaurant's heartbeat. She moved through the maze of tables with an economy of motion that came from years of practice. She was good at her job. She was efficient, observant, and, most importantly, invisible. Patrons saw the plate of food, the refilled water glass, but they rarely saw her. It was an armor she had learned to wear, this cloak of professional anonymity. It protected her from the casual cruelties and dismissive glances that had followed her whole life. Tonight, the air in Aria was particularly charged. The guest list was a constellation of the city's elite, their wealth a palpable pressure in the room. Rowan felt it as a tightening in her shoulders, a need to be even more perfect, even more unseen. Then they arrived. Dante and Isabella Moretti. Even if she hadn't known the name, she would have felt their entrance. A hush followed them as the maitre d', bowing far too low, led them to the best table in the house. He was a man carved from shadow and steel, his presence sucking the air from his immediate vicinity. She was his opposite, a supernova of noise and drama, her voice sharp and loud, dripping with condescension. She wore a stunning deep purple gown that hugged her slender frame, a stark contrast to Rowan's practical black uniform. Rowan was assigned their section. Her stomach sank. She'd served difficult customers before, but this was different. This wasn't just a complaint about corked wine. This was a performance of power, and the entire restaurant staff were unwilling actors. Isabella began her assault immediately. The table was too close to the kitchen, then too exposed. The champagne wasn't cold enough. The amuse-bouche was an insult. Her voice, accented and imperious, sliced through the carefully curated ambience. Other diners shifted uncomfortably, their own expensive evenings being slowly poisoned. Rowan maintained her professional calm, her face a placid mask. She replaced the champagne. She offered alternatives. With every polite nod and quiet, "Right away, ma'am." She could feel Isabella's frustration growing. The woman didn't want solutions. She wanted a reaction. She wanted someone to break. A younger waiter, barely 18, accidentally brushed against Isabella's chair while serving an adjacent table. Isabella's hand shot out and she shoved him hard. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy oaf," she hissed. The boy stumbled, his face flooding with crimson shame as he stammered an apology. Rowan saw the glitter of tears in his eyes as he fled back to the kitchen. That was when the ice in Rowan's veins began to melt, replaced by a slow, simmering heat. The final straw came minutes later. Rowan was clearing their appetizer plates when Isabella lifted her glass of Barolo, looked directly at Rowan, and let it slip from her fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, a violent splash of dark red painting the white stone. "Look what you made me do," Isabella said, her voice ringing with false accusation. "You are impossibly inept. Get on your knees and clean up your mess." The entire restaurant went silent. Every eye was on them. Rowan looked from the shattered glass to Isabella's triumphant, sneering face. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. She set the plates down calmly on the table, straightened up to her full height, and reached out, her fingers closing around Isabella's delicate wrist. "That is enough." The shock on Isabella's face was almost comical. Her painted mouth fell open, a string of Italian curses dying on her lips. The pressure of Rowan's grip was not painful, but it was absolute. Unyielding. For the first time all night, Isabella Moretti was not in control. From his seat, Dante watched motionless. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to peel this waitress's hand off his wife and make her regret the day she was born. His authority, his very reputation, was tied to the respect shown to his family. This was a public challenge, but his body would not obey. He was transfixed. He saw the strength in Rowan's posture, the lack of fear in her eyes. She wasn't looking at him. Her entire focus was on his wife, a silent battle of wills playing out in the center of the room. He saw the way the soft curve of her hip was unapologetic, the solidity of her stance, the way she held her ground not with aggression, but with an unshakable sense of rightness. And he realized the feeling in his gut wasn't admiration. It was recognition. He recognized the steel beneath her soft exterior because it was the same steel that lived in him. Isabella finally found her voice, a sputtering, furious squawk. "How dare you? Do you know who I am? Let go of me." Rowan did not let go. She leaned in slightly, her voice so low only the three of them could hear it. "I know you're a guest in this restaurant, and you are ruining the evening for everyone else. You will stop then." She released her. Just like that. She stepped back, her expression once again placid, professional. As if she hadn't just committed an act of social and professional suicide. Dante finally moved. He raised a single, quiet hand, and Isabella's tirade choked in her throat. His eyes, cold and dark, were not on his wife. They were on Rowan. "The check," he said, his voice a low rumble. Rowan spent the next hour in a state of suspended terror. She brought the leather billfold to their table, placing it silently beside Dante Moretti. She refused to meet his gaze, focusing instead on a point just past his shoulder. She expected him to say something, to threaten her, to have her fired on the spot. He said nothing. He simply placed a thick stack of $100 bills into the folder and stood up, his hand closing around Isabella's upper arm in a grip that was far from gentle. He guided his still fuming wife out of the restaurant without a backward glance. The moment they were gone, the ambient noise rushed back in, louder than before, a torrent of whispers. Rowan's manager, a perpetually nervous man named Mr. Dubois, scurried over, his face pale. She braced herself. "My office now," she thought he would say. Instead, he just stared at her, a strange mix of terror and awe in his eyes. "Just finish your shift, Rowan," he whispered, and hurried away. The rest of the night was a blur. Her hands shook as she refilled water glasses. She could feel the other diners staring, whispering. She was no longer invisible. When she finally clocked out and went to the locker room, she found the billfold. Inside was the cash. She counted it numbly. $5,000. Tucked beneath the last bill was a simple, heavy cream-colored card. On it, in stark black engraving, was a name and a number. Dante Moretti. There was no note, no explanation. Just the silent, heavy promise of his attention. She walked home through the cold city streets, the card feeling like a brand in her pocket. The money was a shock, but the card was a threat. Or a promise. She couldn't tell which, and that was the most frightening part of all. She felt watched, seen in a way she had never been before, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was far from over. The next evening, the fear Rowan had been holding at bay finally found her. She was taking out the trash after her shift, the alley behind the restaurant damp and smelling of stale wine and bleach. The clang of the dumpster lid shutting echoed in the narrow space. When she turned, they were there. Two of them. They were big men, dressed in cheap suits that couldn't conceal the bulk of their shoulders. They weren't Dante's men. They lacked the quiet, lethal stillness she had sensed in him. These men were sloppy, their smirks filled with a brutish anticipation. Well, well, the first one said, stepping forward to block her exit. Look what we have here. The little waitress with the big mouth, Rowan's heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her ground, her chin lifting instinctively. I don't know what you're talking about, the second man laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. Oh, I think you do. See, Mrs. Moretti was very upset last night. She feels you were disrespectful. She asked us to have a little chat with you. To adjust her attitude, he took a step closer, cracking his knuckles. The alley suddenly felt very small, the brick walls closing in. Rowan backed away until her shoulders hit the cold, grimy brick. There was nowhere to run. This is a mistake, she said, her voice tight but steady. The first man lunged, his hand grabbing her arm. His grip was nothing like hers had been on Isabella. It was bruising meant to hurt. The only mistake, he snarled, his face close to hers, smelling of stale cigarettes, was putting your hands on what belongs to the boss, but before he could finish, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the mouth of the alley. I believe, a calm, cold voice said, that you are the ones making a mistake. The men froze. A third figure stepped into the dim light. He was lean and impeccably dressed, his face a mask of bored disapproval. It was Marco, the man who had been standing behind Dante's chair. He wasn't alone. Two more shadows flanked him, silent and immense. The thug holding Rowan's arm released her as if her skin had suddenly become molten lava. Marco, we were just, he stammered. Marco took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the two thugs. You were just acting without authorization. Mrs. Moretti's temper is her own business. But when her actions risk drawing unwanted attention, it becomes Mr. Moretti's business. And he does not approve. The next few seconds were a blur of swift, brutal violence. There was no shouting, only the sickening, wet thud of fists hitting flesh and the soft gasp of men falling. It was over almost before it began. Marco straightened his tie, not a hair out of place. He turned his gaze to Rowan, who was pressed against the wall, her breath coming in ragged bursts. His expression was unreadable. Mr. Moretti extends his apologies for this inconvenience, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He does not appreciate freelance foolishness. He has asked me to ensure you get home safely. He gestured to a black sedan that had pulled up silently at the curb. You are under his protection now. The summons came the following afternoon. It wasn't a call. A black car, the same one from the alley, was waiting for her when she left her apartment building. Marco stood by the open rear door, his expression as impassive as ever. Mr. Moretti wishes to speak with you, he stated.
It was not a request.
The ride was silent, taking her to a part of the city she had only ever seen in magazines. They pulled up to a monolithic skyscraper of black glass and steel. The penthouse office was a testament to absolute power. One entire wall was a window, offering a god's-eye view of the city below. Dante Moretti sat behind a massive desk of polished ebony, not looking at her, but at the skyline. He didn't rise when she entered. Marco closed the door behind her, leaving them alone. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Rowan stood in the center of the vast room, feeling small and exposed. Finally, he turned his head, his dark eyes pinning her in place. Why did you do it? He asked. His voice was quiet, a low vibration that seemed to make the air hum. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. She was being cruel, Rowan answered, her own voice surprisingly steady. She was hurting people. Your money buys you a fine meal. It doesn't buy you the right to humiliate the staff. He watched her, his head tilted slightly. A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, crossed his face before being suppressed. Most people in your position would have been afraid. I was, she admitted. But sometimes there are things you should be more afraid of. Like becoming the kind of person who stands by and does nothing as she spoke. The office door burst open. A frantic man in a suit rushed in, followed by Marco, who looked apologetic. "Boss, I'm sorry. It's urgent. We've been hit again. Another shipment gone. It's the Valentis, it has to be. They knew the route. We have a leak." Dante's face hardened, the brief flicker of humanity gone, replaced by the cold mask of the dawn. He listened as his men listed the possibilities, the potential traders. A captain named Gallo. A port supervisor. A driver. The names meant nothing to Rowan. She stood quietly to the side, waiting to be dismissed. But as they spoke, a memory surfaced. Something she had seen a few nights ago, from the window of the bus on her way home from work. A detail, insignificant at the time. "The captain," she said, her voice cutting through their heated debate. "Gallo. What does he look like?" Dante turned to her, his brow furrowed in annoyance at the interruption. "Older. Graying hair, heavy build." "Why?" "I saw him," Rowan said softly. 3 nights ago. Near the restaurant. He was meeting someone. They were arguing. Dante's men fell silent. All eyes were on her. "Describe the other man," Dante commanded, his voice sharp. And she did. She closed her eyes for a second, accessing the file in her mind, the strange and perfect recall she'd always had. Tall, thin. A long black coat. He had a silver watch, a very specific one, with a blue face and a steel band. There was a small, crescent-shaped scar on the back of his right hand. He was smoking, and he put the cigarette out on the heel of a custom-made leather shoe. The car they were standing near was a dark green sedan. The license plate ended in 9EC. A stunned silence filled the room. Marco stared at Rowan as if she had just sprouted wings. Dante's gaze was electric, a current of pure, focused intensity. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished desk. "You're certain?" Rowan nodded. "I remember things. Faces, numbers, small details. I always have." Dante turned to Marco, his voice cracking like a whip. "The watch. The scar. The license plate. Find him." Marco was already on his phone, relaying the information with clipped efficiency. The other men backed out of the room, leaving Rowan alone with Dante once more. The air between them had changed. The dynamic had shifted completely. He was no longer just a powerful man interrogating a waitress. He was looking at her as if she were a weapon he had just discovered he possessed. "This ability of yours," he said slowly, his eyes searching hers. "This memory. You saw this man for a few seconds, from a moving bus, 3 nights ago." "Yes," she confirmed. "It's just how my mind works. It's usually not very useful." "Not useful?" A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips for the first time. It transformed his face, making him look both younger and infinitely more predatory. "My dear girl, I believe you have no idea how useful you are." An hour later, Marco returned. His face was grim but triumphant. "We found him." The description was perfect. "His name is Luca Valeni. He's the underboss of the Valeni family. We picked up Gallo half an hour ago. He's singing." He confessed to feeding Luca their shipping schedules for months. The betrayal had been deep, cutting into the heart of the Moretti operations. And Rowan, the chubby waitress from Aria, had exposed it all with a memory of a scar and a watch face. Dante stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her face with a raw, possessive hunger that made her skin tingle. "You did in 5 minutes what my entire organization has failed to do in 3 months, he said, his voice a low, reverent murmur. "You saved me millions. More than that, you saved me from the humiliation of being betrayed from within." He saw her then, not as a curiosity or a brave girl, but as a queen with a hidden crown. The fallout was swift and merciless. Rowan heard whispers of what happened to Gallo and the other traders, stories that made her stomach clench. Dante Moretti did not tolerate disloyalty. His next act of business was closer to home. He summoned her again, not to the office, but to a private suite at a hotel that overlooked the park. When she arrived, Isabella was there. The purple dress was gone, replaced by a simple black one. Her face was pale and stripped of its usual defiant hauteur. She looked smaller, diminished. Dante stood by the window, his back to them both. "You sent men after her," he said to his wife, his voice flat and cold. "It wasn't a question." Isabella flinched. "Dante, she humiliated me. She put her hands on me. She did what I should have done years ago," he replied, turning around. His eyes were like chips of obsidian. "She held you accountable. And for that, you tried to have her beaten in an alley." He took a step toward Isabella, who shrank back. "You have been a liability for a long time, Isabella. Your noise, your drama. I tolerated it. But you endangered something that belongs to me. That is a line you do not cross." "Belongs to you?" Isabella shrieked, her composure cracking. "She's a fat waitress. I am your wife." Dante's gaze flickered to Rowan, a brief, hot look that felt more intimate than a touch. "You are the mother of no one, and the wife of a man whose name you have tarnished," he said coldly. "As of this moment, you are nothing. Your accounts are frozen. Your cars are gone. You will be placed on a flight back to Sicily tomorrow morning with a single suitcase. Do not try to contact me again." Isabella stared, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, before it crumpled into a desperate plea. But Dante had already turned away. He gestured to the door, and Marco was there to escort the weeping, broken woman out of the room and out of Dante's life. The door clicked shut, leaving Rowan and Dante in a profound silence. He walked over to her, his movements fluid and deliberate. He stopped just before her, lifting a hand to gently brush the smudge of flour that, he now realized, was a permanent feature on her cheek. "She was wrong," he murmured, his thumb stroking her soft skin. "You are not a waitress. You are my clarity, my order in the chaos." He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying devotion. "You are no longer safe out there, and I will not allow what is mine to be unguarded. You belong with me now." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, as undeniable as the gravity that held the city to the earth. Rowan looked into his dark, intense eyes and saw not a cage, but a strange and terrifying sanctuary. In the weeks that followed, her old life dissolved like a photograph in water. Her small apartment, her job at Aria, the cloak of invisibility she had worn for so long, it all vanished. She now lived in the rarefied air of Dante's world, a world of black cars, silent bodyguards, and whispered reverence. At first, she felt like a fraud, a bird with common feathers in a gilded cage. But Dante did not treat her like a pet or a possession to be displayed. He treated her like a confidant, a partner. He brought his problems to her, not for her to solve, but for her to see. He would lay out complex business dealings, rivalries, and internal politics, and she would listen. And often, she would notice something no one else had. A discrepancy in a financial report, a pattern in a rival's movements, the echo of a lie in a subordinate's flattery. Her memory, once a useless quirk, was now a formidable weapon in his arsenal. The men who had once looked through her now looked at her with a deep and abiding respect. Marco, in particular, became her shadow, not just a guard but a genuine ally, often seeking her opinion before he even approached Dante. She was no longer Rowan, the chubby waitress. She was Rowan, the woman who saw everything. One evening, she stood with Dante on the balcony of the penthouse, the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. She was wearing a simple, elegant blue dress he had bought for her, a color that made her dark eyes shine. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was solid and warm, a wall of strength at her back. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent. "They all fear you now," he murmured against her ear. "More than they fear me, I think. They call you the seer." Rowan leaned back into his embrace, a small smile touching her lips.
She had not changed.
She was still the same woman who had grabbed Isabella Moretti's wrist in a crowded restaurant. The world around her had changed. It had finally learned to see her. Dante's hands tightened around her, his touch full of fierce, possessive worship. "You brought order to my world," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she was just beginning to understand. You are the calm at the center of my storm, and I will never, ever let you go. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his